Hello, guys. Welcome to today's session on our web design bootcamp. Welcome to day 4. I'm glad we've got up to this point. It's nice having you guys. Today, we'll be going into talking about CSS positioning. So, remember, I'm your instructor for this session, and I go by the name Prince Will. A level set Prince Will as your instructor for this session. And today I come to you guys today with a new topic in CSS to help us understand how we can better style and structure our website. So we'll be talking about CSS positioning today. CSS positioning is a fundamental concept that allows you to control how elements are placed on a web page. In CSS, the position property specifies how an element is positioned in the document. The different value for the position properties are static positioning, right? So in CSS positioning, we have the different types of positioning tools that you can use within CSS language, and one of them you see right here is called static positioning. Now, static positioning, this is the default positioning for all elements, right? Elements are positioned in the normal document flow. The top, right, bottom, and left properties have no effect, right? And then the use case for this particular static positioning style or method is for content that doesn't require special placement. So when you're when you're designing your website, you have all content actually arranged in an ordered format. That ordered format use this static positioning method. So you don't really need that for when you're using when you're trying to like not maybe give your content a special styling and pattern or placement. So the next one we have here on the slide is relative positioning, right? You saw the static positioning is the default. So by default, every content in a website takes static positioning method. So the next one is the relative positioning. The element is positioned relative to its normal position in the document flow. You can use the top, right, bottom, and left properties to move it, right? To move. So it's relative to its original position. Now, the use case when you use the use case for the relative positioning is to slightly adjust an element position without affecting the layout of the surrounding element. So when you have a parent element, right? And what I mean by parent element, basically we're going to see when we start and practicing it. But just a short description for this is when using relative positioning, you're actually having an element or a like an element, right, in your web content relative to what to its parent position. So if you for as an example, you agree if you go on some website, right, and then you click on a button maybe at the top, right, and then you have a small page that is actually displayed while the background it gets dark a little bit. It happens in most websites. That that web that smaller size web page that is being displayed uses relative content, right? Because the header now in that case becomes like the parent element of that particular sub or small element, right, or small web page screen. Now it becomes relative to it, right? So now when using a positioning pattern like this, you use it in a way that it doesn't um, break, right, or disturb other elements, thereby causing an irregular outlook, right? So the next positioning pattern is absolute positioning. The element is removed from the normal document flow, right, and positioned relative to its nearest positioned ancestor, right? Relative, absolute, or fixed. So If no such ancestors exist, it's positioned relative to the HTML element. Surrounding element ignores the position element. And for use case, for precise placement like modals or tooltips. So we're going to see this implementation when we start practicing it, right? Now, the next one is the fixed positioning. The element is removed from the normal document flow and positioned relative to the viewport. The viewport meaning the browser window. It does not move when scrolling, right? So when you have it fixed, it doesn't move when scrolling at all. It's like when you have a long web page and then you scroll down, you always see that rounded button at the bottom, or you click on it, it takes you back to the top, right, of that particular web page. So there's a part where you scroll down to it, that particular button appears, right, and then you keep scrolling, it stays at that particular constant position. The position method used for that particular implementation is known as the fixed positioning. And then we have the last one, which is known as sticky positioning, right? Now, in sticky positioning, the element toggles between relative and fixed, right? Depending on the user's scroll position. Positioned relative to its nearest scrollable ancestor. Then it's the use case for sticky positioning is for sticky headers or table of content section, right? Now, this implementation will be easier for you to understand when we put it into practice, right? Now, this whole theoretical aspect might sound foreign. So, in that case, we'll go into our code editor and start practicing these patterns and styles. Now, in I believe so. You open your VS Code, right? And in your VS Code, you should have your HTML and CSS file ready, right? So today we're going to practice how to use these positioning tools to understand the layout breakdown, how contents are being positioned in in the right order or in the right proportion for beautiful styling of our web page and having a um, more interactive session with every website we design or we use, right? And most especially for uh, consumers, right, who's going to use our web page to have a more better user interface and also user experience, right? So in that order, we'll generate our HTML boilerplates. Remember, last class I talked about how to auto generate your HTML boilerplate by holding your shift button and your one button to give you an exclamation mark, and then you click enter and you have your HTML boilerplate ready. Right. For today, we're going to give our title a custom name other than document. We're going to call it CSS positioning. We're going to call it CSS positioning, right? So now we'll go in and start trying out these different ways and patterns to actually position your content on your web page. So in that order, I'm going to start with the first one, which is a static positioning. So I'll create a div. And the reason why I'm using a div is I'm going to call my div static. So the reason why I'm using the div is to create like a container so that I can give it height and width and styling, right? While I have the content present inside it. So I'll call it static. Sorry about that. So I'll call it static positioning. Call it static positioning, right? And then when I load this, so remember we use the go live button here for those of us that already have our live server installed. So click on the go live. Then when we do, it to generate a web page that has static positioning, right? So I'll also go ahead and implement. Um, so in this session, we're going to make use of external CSS styling. So we're going to create. I already created my style.css file. So remember how to create a style.css file. Then you link them by running link. You remember this drop down I spoke about, and then you have link CSS, and you have your styling settled, right? So now I'll go ahead and then I'll go ahead and give my div. So I'll go ahead and give my div a proper styling pattern. So, but first of all, style my body element. So I'll style my body element by giving it margin of 0, and also padding of 20 pixels. I'm going to give a margin of 0 and padding of 20 pixels. So this will basically position our content in the right order, right? So that is why I'm giving it this. And then we'll go and style. So in this case now, remember I talked about element selector. So when calling element selector, if you call so let's say for example I'm calling div as an element, which div is an element here, right? So I'm going to take this one out. It's not needed. So div is an element, yeah, right? So if I call element selector, it's going to style every element that has that particular name. So, and that's the goal, because I want all our content, right, to have the same styling pattern. So for my div, I'm going to give it I'm going to give it a color, a text color of white, because I'm giving the background different colors. I'm going to give it a text color of white, right? And you can't see it here because the text color is white. And I'm going to give it a font weight to make it thick, font weight of bold. And I'm going to make it align to the center. So I'm going to give it a text align center, right? And then I'm going to so in that case, let's see what. So I'm going to call this div class, right? Because I want to give it specific background color and size. So I'm going to call the class my CSS of dot static, and dot static. I'm going to say I'm going to give it the background color of, so since the color is white, I want to give it the background color of something dark a little bit. So give it brown, so you can see what we've done so far, right? And I'm also going to give it width of, let's say, no, let's just give it a height. Let's give it a height. I'm not going to give it a height here. Sorry about that. So I'll give it a height here. I'll give it a height of 20 pixel. Okay, so that should increase. So I want it to be increase more a little bit. So I'm going to give it 50 pixel. 50 pixel is enough, right? So also my div, I want the content inside my div to have a padding of 20 pixels. So yeah, so if I'm giving the paddings, so the next styling I'm going to give to it is margin of 20 pixel, right? And 0. So this will basically give my content a more visually appealing view, right? So that you can be able to see what we're doing and then see how these changes affect this particular content. So now for this specific um, element, I'm going to then set its position. So I'm going to set its position. I'm going to set its position to static. So I'm going to set its position to static. So if you can see, nothing happened, right? So take it back. Let me see. It's fresh. Nothing happened. Why? Nothing happened because initially we covered in the slide that static position is the default position, right? For every website, right? All contents are being positioned statically, right? So this is static. I'm sorry, this is a default position, right? Now let's go ahead and implement another div, right? Let's go ahead and implement another div. And this time we'll implement a new div, and this div we'll call this one relative, right? So this, so I also showed you the easier way of creating a an element with a class in it, right? So in this case, I'm going to say div dot, I'm going to say relative, so relative, and then boom, it gives me my relative, right? So I'm going to say relative, right? Positioning. Right? So this div now will already inherit um, these whole divs um, instructions or code, right? Or implementations rather. So it's going to just inherit it because why? This div here is an element selector and we're selecting all elements that's called div. So in this case, I'm going to say dot relative, right? Dot relative, and then we're going to give it a background color of, let's give it teal. Let's give it caded blue, right? So you're going to see has that, right? And then we're going to set, let's see how the position will look like. Position relative, right? So if I refresh, you'll see that this particular okay, it was refreshing. So if I refresh now, you see that this particular content remains in this position, right? But there are more implementations that I've also put in. So remember, in positioning, it uses the CSS command of top, right, bottom, right, and then left. So now I'm going to set top, right, to 20 pixels, and let's see what happens, right? You can see it pushed it down, right? So you're taking it down. So if I put in, let's say, 50 pixel, it's going to take it down more, right? Because it's creating a, a space between the upper element, the upper content, right? And then by pushing it 50 pixels below, right, the upper content. So at the top of it now, at the top of it, you see again, it goes up. Now, right here in this particular content, right here, this is known as the border, right? This line here is known as the border. And then here becomes like the bottom of um, this particular element, right? Or this particular div. Now, also, this point here becomes the top of this particular div, right? This relative position div. So now, if I give this relative position a top styling of 50 pixels, I'm saying from the top, take it down 50 pixels, right? Create a space, a boundary of 50 pixels between this particular element and this particular element. So I'm going to give it again 50 pixels, then we'll see. So that's the implementation. Now, I will also add like another one. I also add another one to it of left. Let's see what happens. So we're going to give it left of 20 pixels. So what happens? Takes it to the left, right? So you can easily move these elements, right? Making use of relative positioning, right? Using the top, left, right, bottom code, right? To take them into the particular location, right? In that in our web page that we're actually satisfied with. So let's take this out. Let's see what happens if we try taking it right. Let's see. 20 pixels. Takes it to the right. So now it's creating a space. Now you say from the right side, push it, right? Push this element or push this content by following 20 pixels, like just within 20 pixels, a space of like 20 pixels. Remember, 20 pixels is a measuring unit. Pixels is a measuring unit in CSS, right? So you're saying take it, push it, right? Push it from the right side. So that is the implementation, right, for relative positioning. Now, the next one will be absolute. Absolute, right? Now for absolute, I'm going to go create another web page, so another element for absolute. So absolute will be I'm going to create my div. So I'm going to say my div dot absolute. Then we're going to have absolute container. We'll have absolute container. Right? So I'm going to go to my CSS now. And then in my CSS, I'll say dot absolute. I'm going to give it a background color. I'm going to give it a background color of chocolate. Right? I'm going to give it a background color of chocolate. Can you see what's going on here? The absolute positioning or absolute container in this case is appearing underneath the relative position. Remember, we talked about ancestor position, ancestor elements, right? In this case, this relative positioning is the ancestor element of this particular absolute container, right? So now the question comes in and says, how can we handle this, like this style, right? So now I'm going to say, going to set I'm going to set this one. I'm going to say position. I'm going to set position to relative, right? I'm going to set position to relative, and then it appears at the front, right? Now this relative this positioning now, what does it do? Position the ancestor container or ancestor element to actually position itself behind the absolute element, which in this case, the absolute element is a child element of this ancestor element, right? So we add more implementation to this to see what happens, right? So Now say, let's just see what goes on here, and we'll give it. Um, I'll change position now. Let's see what happens. We're going to say absolute. Right? You can see the changes, right? So I'm going to set top to, let's set top to say 20 pixels, right? You can see the absolute container can basically be placed, right, at any positioning you want, right? Now, for this absolute container, we made an example of something known as a modal, right? A modal is a web page that holds, say, specific information in the website and won't be reviewed unless you actually click on that particular part of your website, and then it reviews that particular information. Now, in styling a modal, you're using the absolute positioning, right? You saw when I set it to relative position, it was relative to this element, right? Or without any position, you can see, right? Now, if I set it back to absolute, you see with absolute positioning, it has the ability to be placed anywhere around the web page, right? Let's also see what happens if we set it to the right with 50 pixels, right? It goes to the right side of our page, right? Okay, now what if, let's take out the top, right? Let's see what happens. It comes down. What if, okay, let's leave it at the top and let's see. I want to try and see if I can override the styling by setting it to the bottom, right? With 90 pixels, right? You see nothing happens, right? So what happens if I take this out? See, it came down to the bottom, right? 90 pixels. So now we've seen that the difference between these three positioning pattern now is static position is the default position. Relative position actually makes use of like top, right, left, bottom, right, and is relative to that particular element that is actually close to it. But the absolute positioning makes your content, right, to appear at different parts of your web page, right? Different parts of your web page. So now, what happens if we implement the next positioning style, right? Which is known as the fixed position. Fixed position. Let's see. So I'm going to go back to my HTML element and I'm going to create another div, right? So I'm going to create another div, and this time I'm going to call this div, so it's a div fixed, right? And this one I'm going to say fixed. I'm basically just going to call the other div so that we don't have to go back and forth. So I'm going to call sticky, but in sticky, I'm going to give sticky a div container. So we're going to say sticky container. Inside sticky container, I'm going to call a div of dot sticky, right? The div of dot sticky, I'm going to say sticky position. Okay, so sticky positioning. So now let's go ahead and implement our fixed position. So for the fixed, that's a dot fixed. So for dot fixed, I'm going to say background color of, let's give it cornflower blue. Okay, so cornflower blue. Yeah. So the now if we give this particular fixed position a fixed size, right, it's going to make that particular content stay on that fixed position, right? On that particular position, you move from that particular position. So now we're going to say, we're going to give it a bottom of 10 pixel, right? Bottom of 10 pixel. Before I do that, I'm just going to give it position fixed. You can see what happened. Position fixed basically took this fixed position down to the bottom here without it moving what, an inch. So I also took it 10 pixels to the bottom, right? So what about taking it from that part of the web? Let's take it to the right. Let's see what happens. So it's a 10. It's a 10 pixels. Let's see what happens. So 10 pixels basically takes it to far right, right? So we've been doing these whole implementations, right? But one thing I want you to know is that in positioning, we make use of top, left, right, and bottom in actually styling our content, right? In a more appropriate position within our web layout, right? So the next one is the sticky. But first of all, for sticky, we're not going to call the sticky. We're not going to call the sticky div element just like that. We're going to see we actually put sticky inside a parent div. Right. We have sticky put inside what, a parent div, and then we're going to actually style it from this part, this area. So we're going to say dot sticky container. So we're going to call it the container div, another div. So we're going to call it sticky container. Then when it says sticky container, we're going to have a height of 30 pixel. And then we're going to have a background color of tomato. Then we're going to have an overflow of auto. And then we're going to have a border. We're going to have a border of 2 pixel solid for black, right? So we're also going to have actually my height is also 300 pixel. Okay, so as to make it more large, right? So we're going to have I want to set the background color. I'm change the background color to something more lighter because I'm also going to style the div inside the sticky container, right? So I'm going to set it to F. I'm going to set it to F F5 F. Let's set it to F5 F5, right? So this is what it's going to look like, and then I'm going to implement. Now I'm going to call the sticky container. So I'm saying dot sticky. I'm going to call background color of F background color of FF 9800. So these are going to be our sticky container. That's how it's going to look like. Now let's position it. So let's set position to sticky. Going to set position to sticky. We're going to set top to 0. Now it's going to stick. It's going to stick to the top of the scrollable container, right? Going to stick to the top of the scrollable container. So, see, there's something I want to implement in here. Sticky container height 300 and background color overflow auto. So it's supposed to enable scrolling. So scrolling is supposed to be enabled. So let's set this to 70 pixel. We'll just make it 100 pixel. I'll just add a little bit and make it 200. Okay, so take it back to 100. I'm trying to enable that scrolling functionality. Okay, so I'm going to do something here. So I'm going to say 120. Okay, so I'm going to manipulate the size of our sticky element, right? So I'm going to set the height of it. I'm going to set the height of it to say 40 pixels, right? Okay, it's going to affect it. So let's leave it at. So this is basically how, like, this is just how the whole process goes from creating, writing your code and styling. You have to try different ways, right? You have to try different pattern to make sure that the content or the code you're writing, right, follows through the appropriate format or the appropriate way you want that particular code to be, right? So now this is a scrollable container, right? It's a scrollable container, and so this is a scrollable container. And then if I try increasing the size of the container, it goes from one, it goes from 120 to 130. It actually takes away that scrolling functionality. So basically, this sticky container, what it does is that it actually um, make this content of sticky positioning, right? Stick, since I set it to top 0. So basically it's going to stick to that particular position, right? Since this is a scrollable container, so it's going to just stick to that position of top 0, right? So basically this is just how you position the different elements, right? So we just went through a basic implementation. This is a very, very basic implementation, right? Taking this whole idea of positioning from this basic context to a more project driven context that will give us a more deeper understanding of how it feels to use positioning, right? Now, just a sneak peek into what's going to go on tomorrow. So, what's going to go on tomorrow is that with everything, positioning, um, layout designs, um, using HTML tags and also CSS tags, using external CSS styling, you're going to go through the session is going to like take you through how to use all of these to what to build a basic landing page. So tomorrow is going to be our last day of this boot camp. You're going to see how you can take all these implementations from HTML and CSS and design a landing page, right? Which will take you from being an absolute beginner to someone with a basic fundamental knowledge and starting point to design your first um, web page, right? So thank you very much for tuning in with us tonight, joining this session, and also going through this whole session from the beginning down to this point. It's not easy. So thank you very much. And tomorrow we'll have a more project-driven session, right? Thank you. See you tomorrow. Bye.